Okay, we're in business.
Okay, so I decided to talk today about Jews of Bulgaria and the Holocaust. This is the second time I've talked on a subject relating to the Holocaust, and it's not because my family was in any way affected by the Holocaust. In fact, both sides of my family, my grandparents came to the United States around the turn of the 20th century, around the year 1900, or actually in my mother's case, even before then. And a few years ago, Shiur Weinrab gave a talk at Beth Aaron and Teaneck. He mentioned several heroes, one of whom was Rabbi Shapiro of the Warsaw Ghetto. In the middle of his talk, he says, you know, Holocaust, such a horrible thing. We all lost people, all lost relatives in the Holocaust. And I said to myself, gee, I don't think I did. And then I asked my cousin, who knows the genealogy of my family. She said, well, my grandfather had two sisters. My grandfather was born in the Ukraine. He came to America in 1902, but he had two sisters, apparently, and they actually were half sisters, who never got out of Russia, Ukraine. And one of them we know survived, and either she or her children or grandchildren came to America about 20 years ago. The other one seems disappeared in the 1940s. Nobody knows what happened to her. So that's about the extent of my family's involvement with the Holocaust, but it's an interesting subject. And I also have been reading various books that we have. Beth Aaron's got a nice library, and I pick various books to read. And I happened to pick this book, which is called In the Sephardic Communities. And it's it's called Shoah in the Sephardic Communities. And it discusses how the Sephardic communities in Europe were affected by the Holocaust. We tend to think of Poland and Russia and Germany and, you know, those kind of countries where you had Ashkenazim, but of course the Sephardim were also affected and very severely affected in certain countries. And one of the countries it discusses is Bulgaria. And I never had been aware of what happened to the Jews in Bulgaria during the Holocaust. We know of various extremes, of course, like what happened in Poland and Ukraine, where the Jews were just rounded up and killed immediately. And some of these countries, like 95% or 99% of the Jews were killed. Basically, they had no warning, and they just, Nazis came in and in many cases, with the assistance of the local population, just murdered all the Jews. And there also were situations like Germany. Germany actually had one of the highest survival rates because there everything was gradual. First, you enacted the rules that Jews can't be doctors, they can't be lawyers, they can't go to the stores except for a few hours, they can't own a radio, they can't do this, they can't do that. And it was kind of like a hint, we don't want you here, get out of here. And most of the Jews found some way to get out. Many of them did not, of course, but many of them did. And then you've got a situation of what happened in Denmark. You all know the story that there were actually relatively few. I think it was about 8,000 Jews in Denmark, and the local population strongly supported them to the point that they had this rescue operation where they had these boats and they rowed all the Jews to Sweden, which was a neutral country, and it was safe there. And I always wondered, how did that happen? I mean, after all, how could the Nazis not have known what was going on? And after doing a little bit more research into the subject, I'm quite sure the Nazis did know what was going on and just chose to look the other way because they wanted the support of Denmark as a country, and Denmark was willing to support the Germans and Nazis, but not this part of the Nazi program. And they realized that if they pushed this too far, they might lose the entire support of the Danish people. So they let it go on. On the other hand, in countries like Ukraine and Poland, where by and large, the population was not supportive of the Jews. In fact, in some cases, they were only too eager to join the Nazis and kill the Jews. There, the Nazis were able to accomplish their goal completely. So where does Bulgaria stand here? So a lot of what I'm talking about comes from this book here, where they interviewed a number of survivors who then moved to Israel. This book was written in about 2005. So in 2005, the survivors of the Holocaust, who were like about 20 years old, they were born, say, in 1925 approximately, and they would have then been 80 years old. So many of them were still alive and were able to talk and give stories as to what happened. They're very, very interesting stories. The book is poorly edited. I mean, I have written books. I know how you write a book and how you edit a book. This one, they did a really bad job editing it, but they did a fantastic job in getting the basic material, and you can still read the book and understand most of it. And so I've been reading this book, and I found that particularly the story of Bulgaria was very interesting and very different from what I had thought. It seems that the Jews in Bulgaria had a pretty good relationship with the rest of the country. It wasn't as good necessarily as we had in Denmark, but it was certainly nothing like you had in Ukraine, where the local population was just find any excuse to kill the Jews. They were basically got along well with the rest of the population. But there was a complicating factor in the case of Bulgaria. Bulgaria was allied with the Germans in World War I, and of course the Germans lost World War I. And part of the effect of the defeat in World War I was that there were several parts of Bulgaria, particularly places called Macedonia and Thrace, which were originally part of Bulgaria, and they were taken away during World War I, and the Bulgarian people were very upset about that. So now the Germans come during beginning World War II, and they tell the Bulgarians, okay, we're going to conquer these lands and we're going to give them back to you. So there was a tremendous push to support the Germans, and as a result, they would get back these two lands, and in fact, they did. So around 1940, Bulgaria had a parliament, but it was governed by a king. There was a King Boris, who apparently was more than just a figurehead. Seems that he actually controlled what was going on to a large extent. And to the extent that he was an anti-Semite or favored the Jews is a very interesting question, which has never been fully resolved. I'll mention that a little later. But around late 1940, early 1941, the parliament in Bulgaria passed a law that was called the Law for the Protection of the Nation. That's what it's called, but in effect, in essence, it was an anti-Semitic law, which basically said Jews can't serve in the army, they can't hold elective office, they can't become citizens, they can't do this, they can't do that. And the law was passed in 1941, and at the time, the head of the parliament was a guy by the name of, his first name, Peshev. And he was a deputy speaker of the parliament, and he supported the law, the Mitar Peshev. And he supported the law, and it was enacted. Seems that it wasn't really enforced until later in 1942. But at one point in 42, it did start enforcing it. And then in 43, in early 1943, the king made an agreement with Hitler. And again, there was all to get back this territory. And so he made an agreement that now they got back Macedonia and Thrace. They agreed with the Nazis that they're going to deport 20,000 Jews from Macedonia and Thrace and send them to Auschwitz, basically, wherever the camp was that they were sent to. And all this stuff was supposed to be kept secret. After all, you don't want to give them any warning, you don't want anybody to know about it. And they They did, in fact, deport these Jews on, I think the date was March 4th. Yeah.
Do we know how many Jews there are in total in Bulgaria at this time?
Oh, there is something like 48,000 Jews in Bulgaria proper.
Okay.
That does not include this Macedonia and Thrace. So they agreed with the Nazis, they're going to turn over 20,000 Jews from Macedonia and Thrace. And on March 4th, 1939, they rounded up all the Jews and they promptly sent them to, I think it was Auschwitz, where virtually all of them were killed. But there was one problem. There were 20,000 Jews in Macedonia and Thrace. There were only a little bit less than 12,000 Jews. Oh, well, they agreed to send 20,000. Where do you get the other 8,000 from? So they then turned to Bulgaria, and they turned to a town. There was a town near the border, and there were apparently like 8,000 Jews there, and they decided to round up all the Jews on March the 9th and deport them. Well, now the Jews got wind of this, and
Excuse me, what year was that?
1943. 1943. So they immediately got people together and sent a delegation to Sofia. Sofia is the capital. And they met with this guy, Dimitar Peshev, who was the deputy speaker of the parliament. And he had grown up in this town. And among the people that they sent there was a childhood friend of his. I guess he hadn't talked to this Dimitar in quite a while, but this friend comes and says, they're going to round us up and send us off. And so first, he didn't believe him. So he checked with the Minister of the Interior and finally found out, yes, it's true. They are going to do it. And he then realized that this is a terrible thing. And he now remember, I told you that he had supported the anti-Jewish laws that were enacted in 1941. Either he changed his mind, or he later said he supported those laws in 1941 only because he wanted to support the Germans, and this is what they wanted. He didn't really believe in them, and he thought they wouldn't be enforced, and he just did it pro forma. Maybe that's not true, but in any event, in 1943, he decided to come to the rescue of the Jews. So first, he spoke to the Minister of Interior and got him to agree to postpone the deportations. Then he went around to the parliament and talked to all the members of his party, apparently not for the opposition. He didn't want to be considered to be disloyal to the government. So he talked to all the members of the party that he belonged to and got 42 of them to sign a statement saying that this is wrong and it must be stopped. Then the prime minister heard about this and he was very upset. He was a strong supporter of this anti-Jewish legislation and deportation of Jews. And he demanded that anyone who opposes this has to come on the floor of parliament and speak up on the floor of parliament in favor of saying that he supports the Jews. Well, some of the people dropped out, but 30 of them did that. Notwithstanding that, the proposed legislation that would have canceled the deportation was defeated, and the deportation was never officially canceled. However, the publicity that took place resulted in a groundswell of support for the Jews. A number of groups strongly supported the Jews, and I think the most interesting part is that they had the church, wherever, I forget the name of the church, but the church was ruled by the highest official of the church was called the Metropolitan. It's a funny name, but anyway, that was the name of like the leader of the church, and there were two leaders that very strongly supported the Jewish cause, much more than the churches did elsewhere. In fact, one of those metropolitans supposedly said that if they have these trains and start deporting the Jews, he's going to lie down on the railroad tracks in front of the train and won't let that happen. So the deportations never did happen. Then later on, in I think May 1943, there was pressure put on the king to do something about the Jews, and there were several alternatives. And he finally agreed that the Jews should be, at least the Jews living in Sofia, to all be deported to labor camps. And about 25,000 Jews from Sofia were actually taken to these labor camps. The labor camps were in Bulgaria. They weren't taken to Poland when you had Auschwitz and all those terrible things. And these were really labor camps. It wasn't fun. It was forced labor. People weren't treated very well. But they were, in fact, labor camps, not extermination camps. And the Jews ended up staying there for, I think it was about a year and a half until sometime in 44. In 44, but it's later on, in August 1943, the king died. There's some question about how he died. There's rumors he might have been poisoned or something. But in any event, he died. And then at some point, Bulgaria became allied with Russia. They changed their alliance. They're no longer allied with the Germans. They became allied with Russia. At that point, the labor camps were dismantled and the Jews were free to go back home. And it seems, from what I've read, that hardly anybody died in these camps. I mean, you'd think that forced labor camps, obviously not a lot of fun, but also the conditions may have been so bad that some people were dying. I imagine some did, but it seems that very few did. And at the end of the war, virtually all the Jews from Bulgaria itself. Now, of course, we know that like 11,500 Jews from Macedonia and Thrace were deported, sent to Auschwitz. Almost all of those Jews were killed in Auschwitz. So you do have that, but the ones who lived in Bulgaria proper, it seems that hardly anyone was killed during this period. In fact, there's even some people say that Bulgaria had the highest percentage of survival of any of the countries, which is pretty amazing. So then what happens after the war? Well, this guy.
What happened to the original 20,000 that came from Macedonia?
No, there weren't 20,000. They said they wanted to deport, they had to deport 20,000. They only had 11,000. There were only
11,000.
Yeah, they were deported and sent to Auschwitz, and they almost all of them were killed in Auschwitz. Right. So we have that as a very severe blot on Bulgaria. After all, Bulgaria is the one who sent those people to Auschwitz. But I find this a little hard to understand that on the one hand, Bulgaria was so supportive of Macedonians, race is part of our country and we got to get them back. But the Jews, we don't care about the Jews here. That's a little puzzling. And then they say, but the Jews in Bulgaria, we can't deport them. So again, it's not entirely consistent. And obviously there were some anti-Semites there. But there also were a lot of people that were supportive of the Jews. And the result was that the ones who lived in Bulgaria, it seems, all survived. And after the war, almost everybody made Aliyah to Israel. Very quickly after the war, they all came to Israel. And now we have this guy, Dimitar Peshev. And I mentioned how he was the one who single-handedly tried to rally everybody in support of the Jews. And while he failed in getting this legislation passed that would have canceled the deportations, he did succeed in getting them postponed, and postponed meant that they actually never took place. And then the king was persuaded by the Nazis to put all of these Jews in the labor camps. Okay. So after even before the war was over, this Dimitar guy was removed from his position. The government was really upset about what he did. And after the war, he was put on trial by the Russians. Apparently, the trial was not so much what he did during the war to help the Jews. It was more that at the time when the Russians were taking over from the Germans, he opposed the Russians. He felt they didn't like the communists either, and they wanted to get back at him. So they accused him of being anti-Soviet and anti-Semitic, which is kind of ironic. But they first sentenced him to death. Then his lawyer pointed out that he had saved one of the top officials there. So they ended up commuting the sentence to 15 years in jail. And then, he only actually served 1 year in jail. But after the war, he was a broken person. He lived in poverty in Bulgaria. Apparently, he made contact with the Jews who come from Bulgaria, who moved to Israel, made contact with him and suggested he move to Israel. And they wanted him to move to Israel, become an Israeli citizen. He said, no, I'm Bulgarian. I want to stay here in Bulgaria. And they gave him some money. Apparently, he got a pension of $40 a month, and managed to live on that. And in 1973, January 1973, Yad Vashem declared him to be one of the righteous Gentiles. And then he died in February 1973. He had wanted Bulgaria to recognize him for what he did. That did not happen during his lifetime. It did happen later. Around 2000, Bulgaria did recognize him. And of course, in Israel, they have a memorial, which is supportive. Again, I think this was erected around 2000 in support of the people of Bulgaria who saved the Jews. And as it was originally put together, they specifically mentioned Dimitar Peshev, who just about everybody agrees really became a righteous Gentile who saved 48,000 Jews, which is just pretty remarkable. They also mentioned the king and recognized the king for supporting the Jews. And that became very controversial. And they formed a committee to study the matter. And after some analysis, the committee decided that the king is not deserving of such recognition, that it seems that he really was not particularly supportive of Jews. In the end, he ordered the Jews to be put in his labor camp rather than being deported, which was another option which he rejected. But he apparently did that mainly because of political pressure of others, not because he really believed it himself. That's what at least some people say. Others say he really did want to save the Jews, and we'll never know, of course, for sure, especially because he died in the middle of this whole thing. And then I think it was 2013, they named a plaza in Washington, D.C. in honor of this Dimitar Peshev. And interestingly, I read here that the Holocaust Museum protested that memorial on the ground that in 1941, Dimitar supported the anti-Jewish laws. And they said, well, therefore, we should not honor him because he supported the laws, anti-Jewish laws in 1941. Now, it seems to me we have a concept of tshuva, and I gave a talk before about Ulysses Grant, where I said he had enacted this anti-Jewish law expelling the Jews from the territory he was a commander of during the Civil War, and it was held against him very strongly after the war. And then he tried to do tshuva, and he did a number of things. He didn't just say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I didn't want to do it, but he actually did some specific thing in support of the Jews. And I said, yeah, it shows that he really did try to do something, and I accept that as tshuva. In this case, the guy, the Demeter guy, not only did he succeed in saving the 48,000 Jews of Bulgaria, but he suffered for the rest of his life. And if there ever were a case where somebody did tshuva, maybe he actually was anti-Semitic at first. I don't know. He claims that he wasn't, and he just did that because they wanted to appease Germany. He didn't think they were going to enforce it. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but even if it isn't true, he did in the end certainly change his mind and took some very significant action in support of the Jews. And I think he really does deserve all the credit that he gets. So it's a very interesting story. I think there's more to be said about it. This is just based on what it says in this book and a few articles that I read, but I found it to be particularly interesting and something that I certainly didn't know about. I don't know if anybody else here did, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about this.
Sure, thank you. Get some benches.
That is your call. Thank you.
Good enough. Okay.
I have some more dates open in December, Tuesday. I'll send them to you if you're
I have
available.
another idea, something I want to do. So
It was very good. I enjoyed it.
thanks.
He's leaving. Revenge.
Okay. Abazan Barech.
Shame on
Shemar Tavelam, Bishus Haverai, Rech, Jachan Mishalo, Rok Jachan Mishalo, the Bochayinu. Pardon me, it's a call. Yeah, send me the dates and I'll see what I can do.
You have to look.
Tomorrow I can't come.
Stop the recording.
No class on Thursday?
No, we're gonna have on Zoom.
On Zoom.
Rabbi Yuden's not.
About you and what?
Rabbi Yuden's not teaching these days. So
Oh, what happened?
he's not feeling so good.
Oh. That's why you got so many vacancies.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Yeah, give me a date. There's something